Hello everyone. Before I'm going to start my discussion, so let me wish you with a good health and a pleasant day to each and every one of us. Okay, so let me introduce myself first. So I am John Edward D. Putoy and I am your presenter for the module 3, which is variables. So before we start, I'm gonna explain to you the course objectives. So number 1, so to explain the meaning of variable and give at least 5 variables that might be investigated by business researchers. Number 2, so show the difference between a variable and a constant. So quantitative from a categorical variable. So third one is appraise how dependent and independent variables are related. And number 4, which is the last one, so to produce an example of moderator variable. Okay, so are you ready? Okay, so let's start. Variables. So for me, I have a quote in mind from high school to college that every individual has their own unique differences. So one thing I am going to connect with this one today is variables in layman's term could be like or could be the same as the differences. Okay, variables or differences. Okay, so let us define first what is variables. Okay, so in research, simply refers to a person, place, thing, or phenomenon that you are trying to measure in some way. So also these characteristics can take on different values such as height, age, temperature, or scores. So that's an example of variables. Also our age, our colors, our shapes. So that's all a variable or differences. Okay? So let's have another example of variables in business. So, salaries and wages. First, it is a variable in business. Second is positions of employees. So, differences in positions of employees. Third is economy. So, differences in economy throughout the nations. So, four, location of the businesses. So, it is a factor or a variable also in business. Next is business expenses. Okay, so those are examples of variables in businesses. Next. Okay. So, on the other hand, if all the members of a group or class are identical, so we do not have a variable. Such characteristics are called constants. So, if we have seen or we can see some the same classes or identical classes or subjects, that means there is no variables affiliated to that. So, the characteristics is called constant. So, constants also always has the same value. So, unchangeable. So, constants are unchangeable. So, throughout the classes or subjects, they are identical or the same. So, has the same value for each research subject. Okay? So, to summarize that, so a variable is something whose value can vary. So, from subject to subject. Whereas constant, it is always the same for each and every subject. So, the keyword for that is when you say variable, vary. So, value can vary. If we're going to say constant, the same for each and every subject or unchangeable. Okay? So, there are many variables out there in the world that can be investigated. So, obviously, we can't investigate them all. So, that's true. We can't investigate them all because we need to choose. Okay? So, we must choose. No? So, researchers choose certain variables to investigate because they suspect that these variables are somehow related and believe that discovering the nature of this relationship can help us make more sense out of the world which will leave. Okay, so are we clear? Very good. So next, so quantitative versus categorical variables. So what are this? What are these variables? So let's find out. Okay, so quantitative variables exist in some degree along continuum from less to more, and we can assign numbers to different individuals or objects to indicate how much of the variable they possess. So quantitative variables refers to numerical data. For example, we can assign numbers to them. So one obvious example of this is your height. So with your height, you can determine if you are 5'10", 5'4", 5'3", 6'1", or 6 flat. So we can assign numbers to height. Second obvious example is your weight. So if your weight is 120 pounds, 200 pounds, 300 pounds, or 250 pounds, so you can assign numbers to that. Okay? So another examples are price of houses and salary. So if we say price of houses, that will be ranging from $20,000 or 100,000 to 200,000. So yeah, and salary. So variables, quantitative. So you can assign numbers to that. It may be 10,000, 15,000, 12,000. So that is what you call quantitative variables, whom you can assign numbers to a certain variable. Okay. So next is categorical variables. So categorical variables do not vary in degree, amount, or quantity, but are qualitatively different. So they are different in some ways, but are categorized as one. Okay. So examples of this categorical variables is color. So we know that the color is blue, green, red, yellow, but we cannot assign numbers to it. Okay? So when we say color, it is the option of that is red, blue, green, and orange. So you cannot assign whether it's five green, four orange. So yeah. Next is occupation. You know that um, that is the job or the description of that, and it is called an occupation. For example, you are the manager, you are the cashier, you are the account officer for a certain financial institution. You can classify that as an occupation, but you cannot um, assign numbers to that. Okay, so it is also a category, or you call it categorical or categorized. So type of trees, you know that they are all trees, but they are different or different in nature. Okay, so also political party. So that's another example of category. So there are different members, but they are one as a political party. Okay, so next one. So let's proceed to independent versus dependent variables. Okay, so independent variables are those that the researchers chooses to study in order to assess their possible effect on one or more other variables. So an independent variable is presumed to affect or somehow influence at least one other variable. So from the word independent, so ND means it can stand on its own. Okay, so it doesn't need another one to stand on its own. So independent variable. So second is the dependent variable. This variable depends on or depending on the independent variables. So depends on what the independent variable does to it, how it affects it. So the difference with them is independent can stand on his own, dependent variable is dependent to independent variables. Okay? So example of this one. So this is the relationship of independent variables, independent variables. So independent variables presume or possible cause. So independent variable is the cause, and dependent variable presume the result. So if you have cause, you have the effect or the result. So independent variable affects the dependent variables. Next, the examples of this. So example of the relationship. So independent variable, sales of the business or the profits or sales of the business establishment. So the dependent variable of that is the government tax revenue. Why? Because if the sales or the profits of the businesses is higher, so the more government tax revenue will be collected from them. So if the business sales is lower, so the lower the government tax revenue will be collected. Okay? So second example of that is economy and profits. So when the economy is on growth or growing, so the profits or the employees that earn money, so more money because of the economic growth, they spend more. So the effect of that is the profits of the businesses will increase also. So that's the relationship of those two. Okay, so next we proceed to a moderator variable. So next type of variable is a special type of independent variable. So this is a kind of independent variable, a moderator variable. So that has been selected for study in order to determine if it affects or modifies the basic relationship between the primary independent variable and the dependent variable. Okay? So a moderator variable may be or may strengthen the relationship between two variables, which is the independent and the dependent variables, or weaken the relationship between two variables, which is the independent and dependent, or negate the relationship between the two. So that's the effect of moderator variable. Okay, so I will show you some examples of moderator variable. So first, our independent variable is the hours of study. So if you're going to use the hours of study as an independent, then the dependent is the exam score. Because if the hours of study is more, the higher the exam score will be. If the hours of study is not that high or it is low, the exam score will be affected also. But there is a moderator among that too. So if you're going to study more but you do not have an IQ or the moderator, so also it affects the two. So even though you study more and you have less with the moderator variable, then I think it will affect also with the exam score, no? So it modifies, or it may be strengthened, may negate, or it may cause negative effect to the relationship of the two. Okay, do you get the pattern for this one, or the what do you call this one? Do you get the example for that one? So another example. So IQ affects the relationship between the two variables. Okay. Next one is hours of work. So hours of work in a certain factory. So the dependent variable of that is units built. So depends of the hours of work. So independent variable is the hours of work. So the units built is the dependent variable. So it depends on the hours of work whether you can come up with the higher units of build. If you have higher hours of work, then you have units built, more units built. If you have low hours of work, then you have units built in lower or lower than the more hours of work. So these are, or there is a key factor between that one. So the moderator of that one is the machine that is functioning with the factory. So yeah, that is the moderator variable between the three. So hours of work, the cost, the effect is the units built. The moderator of the two is the functioning machine. Okay, so functioning machine affects the relationship between the two variables. Okay, so next. Mediator variable is the one that attempts to explain. So another type of this is another type of variables, which is so-called mediator variables. So it is the one that attempts to explain the relationship between the other two variables. Okay, so next one is extraneous variables. So these are independent variables that have not been controlled. So that's all. That's all for my discussion in module 3, and hope you learned something from me. And yeah, thank you so much, and God bless to everyone.